Have you ever had someone look you straight in the eye, stand in the doorway of the life you built with your bare hands, and smile like they just won everything, only for you to realize later that they never actually understood who was holding the real power the entire time? Because that moment, that exact moment, is burned into my memory in a way that no fire could erase. And my name is Daniel Mercer. I am 53 years old, and this is my story, told not because I enjoy reliving it, but because silence nearly cost me the one thing that mattered more than my pride, more than my marriage, more than my reputation, and that was my daughter, the child I chose, the child I raised, the child who looked at me as her father long before anyone else decided to question that word. And I need you to understand that I am not proud of how long I stayed quiet, how often I swallowed my doubts and told myself to keep the peace, how many nights I sat at the edge of the bed staring at the wall, wondering if love meant enduring disrespect. But I am proud of how I protected my daughter when no one was watching, because protection does not always look like shouting or fighting or dramatic gestures. Sometimes it looks like filling out forms carefully, showing up on time, learning names, memorizing routines, and choosing patience when it would be easier to walk away. And the day my wife walked out is a day I replay in my head with perfect clarity, not because it was loud or explosive, but because of how calm it was, how rehearsed, how confident she looked standing there with 2 suitcases lined up neatly by the door, her face relaxed, her voice steady, her eyes already halfway into another life. And she did not yell, she did not cry, she did not hesitate. She simply told me that our daughter needed her real father now, not me. She said it like it was a fact, like gravity, like something that had always been true and I was just slow to catch up. She said she was tired of pretending, tired of carrying dead weight, tired of explaining me to people. And I remember how the word pretending hit me harder than the insult, because everything I had done for that child was real to me. Every late night fever, every school pickup, every scraped knee, every quiet conversation when she was scared or sad or unsure. None of that felt like pretending. And yet my wife said it with such ease, such certainty, that for a brief moment I actually questioned my own reality. And then she smiled, not a cruel smile, not an angry one, but a satisfied smile. The kind people wear when they believe the ending is already written in their favor. And that smile lodged itself in my chest like a splinter I could never quite pull out, because it told me she thought she had already won. She thought she had taken half my life, half my home, half my future, and she believed I would fade quietly into the background, reduced to a footnote in my own story, someone she could erase with a few words in a packed bag. And what she never knew, what she never bothered to check, was that years earlier, long before that smile ever formed, while she was busy chasing validation, reconnecting with people from her past, rewriting the story of her life to make herself the hero and me the obstacle, I had been quietly making sure that every school record, every medical form, every emergency contact, every permission slip, every counseling note, every legal detail pointed back to me, not out of spite, not out of control, but out of responsibility. Because when you are the one who always shows up, you learn that systems run on consistency, not charm. And I had learned that lesson the hard way, over years of sitting in waiting rooms, signing documents, answering phone calls at odd hours, learning doctors' names and teachers' schedules, making myself reachable at all times. And I did it without announcements, without demands for credit, because being a parent is not a performance, it is a pattern, and patterns leave evidence. And fair dinkum, I did not plan revenge. That word never crossed my mind back then. I planned protection. Because when you love a child who depends on you, you do not wait for disaster to prepare. You prepare quietly and hope you never need the armor you are building. And when my wife walked out that door, heels clicking on the floor like punctuation at the end of a sentence she thought she had finished, she believed she erased me. She believed she could come back later if she felt like it and collect whatever she decided was still hers. She believed biology would outweigh presence, that blood would beat time, that confidence would beat paperwork. And as the door closed behind her, something much bigger than either of us woke up, something impartial, something patient, something that does not care about smiles or stories or intentions, something that only follows the truth as it has been recorded over time. And I sat there in the quiet, the house suddenly too large, the air heavy, my hands shaking not from fear but from the realization that everything was about to change. And I did not know how fast or how far or how painful it would be, but I knew one thing with absolute clarity: the truth was already written down, signed, dated, and filed, and no amount of confidence could undo years of consistency. And in that moment, while my wife drove away believing she had taken everything, the truth stayed right where it belonged, waiting. I met my wife when I was 37 years old. already worn down in a quiet way that men who carry responsibility without complaint tend to be, the kind of tired that does not show on the outside but settles into your bones after years of doing what needs to be done without expecting applause. And she was different from me in every visible way. She laughed loudly, filled rooms with energy, drew people in without trying, and yet beneath that bright surface there was a sadness she never fully explained, a restlessness that came and went like weather. And at first I mistook that sadness for depth, something I could help steady with consistency. And when her daughter came into my life, she was 3 years old, small, curious, cautious in that way kids are when they are still figuring out which adults are permanent and which ones disappear. And I knew from the beginning she was not biologically mine. There was no confusion about that. No illusion, no pretending, but something happened. Anyway, something quiet and irreversible, because I chose her, not in a dramatic moment, not with a speech or a promise, but in a series of small decisions that stacked up over time. I chose to get up in the middle of the night when she cried instead of pretending to sleep. I chose to learn which stuffed animal she needed when she was scared. I chose to sit on the floor and build things that fell apart 5 minutes later. I chose to attend parent-teacher meetings where teachers looked at me with mild surprise before getting used to seeing me every semester. I chose hospital waiting rooms that smelled like antiseptic and coffee, holding a small hand while pretending not to be worried. I chose to memorize allergies, medication schedules, appointment times, doctors' names, insurance details, all the boring things people never talk about when they romanticize parenting. And my wife noticed this consistency but never really valued it. She used to call me reliable, and the way she said it always carried a strange edge, like reliable was the opposite of exciting, like it was something solid but dull, something you leaned on but did not admire. And yet reliable is what raises a child when excitement gets distracted. Reliable is what shows up when enthusiasm fades. Reliable is what holds everything together when nobody is watching. And over time I noticed subtle shifts in my wife. Nothing dramatic at first, just longer hours on her phone, more time scrolling, more laughter directed at a screen instead of the room we were sitting in, more talk about reconnecting with people from her past, stories she had already told me but now repeated with a different tone, like she was remembering them through rose-colored glass. She started using phrases that sat heavy in my chest, things like blood matters, kids deserve the truth, roots are important, and I listened, because fighting felt pointless and accusations felt premature, and instead of arguing, I prepared, not because I expected betrayal but because I understood patterns. I had lived long enough to know that when someone starts rewriting the meaning of words, actions usually follow. So when the school district updated its system, I made sure my contact information transferred correctly. When medical offices switched software, I confirmed my details were accurate. I made sure my number was listed first everywhere, not out of ego, but because I was the one who answered the phone every single time. I had normal conversations with counselors, nurses, administrators, nothing dramatic, nothing emotional, just calm exchanges built on familiarity, the kind that comes from years of being present. And I showed up consistently, to school events, to check-ins, to appointments, to small moments that never make it into stories but make up the bulk of a child's life. And people remember that. They remember the face they see over and over, the voice that stays calm under pressure, the person who does not disappear when things get inconvenient. And I remember thinking to myself, no worries, if I keep being steady, if I keep doing what I have always done, this phase will pass, because I still believed in the power of patience. I still believed that love meant endurance. What I did not know, what I could not see at the time, was that while I was quietly reinforcing stability, my wife was already planning her exit, already testing narratives with different audiences, already telling one version of the story to friends, another to family, another to herself, framing me as temporary, convenient, replaceable, someone who played a role but could be written out when the plot changed. And that is the funny thing about people who rewrite history. They focus so much on the story they want to tell that they forget paperwork exists. They forget that systems run on records, not feelings. They forget that time leaves evidence. And while she was imagining a clean break, a dramatic new chapter, I was unknowingly becoming something far more powerful than a husband or a stepfather. I was becoming the documented constant in my daughter's life, the silent parent whose presence was so consistent it faded into the background, unnoticed until the moment someone tried to remove it, and by then it was already too late. The morning she left was quiet in a way that felt wrong, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears and makes you notice things you usually ignore, like the hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the wall clock, the sound of your own breathing. And I remember waking up with that strange sense that something had already happened before I even opened my eyes. like the house knew before I did. And when I walked into the hallway and saw the 2 suitcases lined up neatly by the door, not rushed, not half-packed, but carefully arranged like they had been waiting there all night, my stomach dropped in a slow, heavy way, because packing like that takes time, it takes planning, it takes certainty, and certainty is what scared me most. She was already dressed, already composed, not pacing, not fidgeting, just standing there with that calm face that used to mean she was confident, but now meant she was finished. And she did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She did not accuse me of anything specific. She simply said she had found herself, like it was a destination she had reached while I was still standing still. She said our daughter would be better off knowing her real father full-time. She said it gently, almost kindly, like she was offering me comfort instead of taking something away. She said I could still visit if things stayed friendly. And the word visit cut deeper than any insult because it reduced everything I had been into a guest role in my own child's life. Then she handed me papers, clean, organized, already signed on her end, separation documents, asset division, half of everything laid out in neat legal language, and she said it the way people order coffee, no emotion, no hesitation, like this was just another errand to complete before moving on with her day. And then she smiled, and that smile is something I will never forget, because it was not cruel. It was not mocking. It was confident, settled, satisfied, the smile of someone who believes the ending has already been decided in their favor, the smile of someone who thinks the hard part is over. And behind her, half hidden by the doorway, our daughter stood there holding her backpack, her small fingers gripping the strap like it was the only solid thing in the room, her eyes moving between us, trying to read a situation no child should ever have to interpret. And when she looked at me, there was a question in her eyes she did not know how to ask. Something like, where am I supposed to stand? Who am I allowed to love right now? What happens next? And I knelt down in front of her, not because I wanted to make a point, but because my legs felt weak, and I hugged her, really hugged her, feeling the familiar weight of her, the warmth, the way she fit against me like she always had. And I told her I loved her, not in a dramatic way, not loudly, just clearly. And I told her that no matter what happened, I was always here, not visiting, not checking in, but here. And my wife watched us like it was a performance, like she was an audience member evaluating a scene she had already decided the ending to. She thought love was noise. She thought it was words and gestures and big moments. She thought presence was something you could replace if you swapped the right person into the role. And she had no idea that while she was chasing biology, chasing a version of the truth that made her feel justified, I had already built something far stronger than genetics. I had built belonging. The kind that settles into a child's bones and does not leave just because someone else says it should. And when she finally turned and walked out, when the door closed behind her with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than a slam, I did not chase her. I did not call her name. I did not run after the car, because something inside me knew that chasing would only confirm the story she was telling herself. So instead I sat down at the table and stared at the spot where our daughter usually did her homework, the place where her pencils rolled onto the floor and her notebooks piled up in uneven stacks. And the emptiness hit me all at once, a hollow feeling that spread through my chest and made it hard to breathe. But beneath that emptiness there was something else, something solid and steady, a quiet certainty that surprised me with its strength. Because long before she packed her bags, long before she smiled and handed me papers, I had already made sure the world knew exactly who I was to that child, not through speeches or declarations, but through years of showing up. And as I sat there in the silence of that house, staring at that empty chair, I realized that this moment, this quiet morning with no shouting and no tears, was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of something much larger, something that would test every choice I had ever made. And that is where everything truly began. 3 days after my wife left, while the shock was still settling into my bones and the house still felt unfamiliar in its silence, my phone rang while I was standing in the cereal aisle of a grocery store I had walked through 100 times before. Staring at boxes I suddenly realized I no longer needed because the routine they belonged to had been ripped apart. And I remember thinking how strange it was that life kept asking small, ordinary questions like, what do you want for breakfast, when everything else felt so uncertain. And when I answered the call, the voice on the other end was the school counselor, calm but careful in that professional way that tells you something is wrong without saying it outright. And she explained that my wife had come in earlier that day asking to remove me as an emergency contact and primary guardian. She said it politely, neutrally, like she was reading from a script. But then she paused. And in that pause I could hear the shift, the moment where policy met reality. And she said there was a problem, not a small one, because according to every record they had on file, every form, every update, every system entry going back years, I was listed as the legal guardian, the primary contact, the decision maker, the person authorized to approve everything from field trips to medical treatment, the one who had signed everything. And she asked me, almost gently, if I was aware of this situation. And I told her yes, I was aware, and I told her something else too, something I had never said out loud before. I told her I had been preparing for this moment for years, not because I wanted it to happen, but because I understood how fragile assumptions can be when people change their minds. And when I hung up the phone, I stood there for a long time, the card untouched, the boxes still lined up in front of me, realizing that the quiet work I had done without thinking much of it had just become very loud, because what my wife never understood, what she never valued, was that love leaves a trail, not an emotional one, but a documented one, a trail made up of appointment logs, attendance records, emergency room intake forms, insurance updates, permission slips, counseling notes, the boring paper cuts of responsibility that add up over time. And I had been there for every doctor visit, every late-night emergency room run when a fever spiked or breathing sounded wrong, every clipboard handed to me with a pen attached by a string. I never rushed through those forms, never sighed loudly, never complained about the wait. I just filled them out carefully, double-checked information, signed my name clearly, because those moments mattered to me. And over time the system noticed, schools noticed that I was always the one responding to emails and calls, clinics noticed that I was the one who knew medication names without looking them up, counselors noticed that I was the one attending follow-ups and asking calm, practical questions. And when forms were updated, my name stayed because there was no reason to remove it. When permissions were required, my signature was already there because I had already provided it. My wife trusted words, trusted conversations, trusted charm and confidence to carry her through situations. But I trusted paper, not because I lacked emotion, but because paper does not forget. Paper does not reinterpret the past to suit the present. Paper just sits there quietly holding the truth. And later that same week, the calls started coming in one by one. First from the pediatric clinic asking why someone was attempting to change guardianship information without proper documentation, then from the orthodontist wanting clarification because their records showed a long history of my involvement, then from the after-school program asking why a guardian who had never missed a pickup was suddenly being questioned. And every call carried the same underlying confusion, the same unspoken question: why was someone trying to remove a guardian who had been consistently present for over a decade? And that was the first time I heard the word investigation used. Not by me, not by a lawyer, not by anyone trying to escalate things, but by professionals whose responsibility was to protect a child. And fair dinkum, I did not push. I did not demand action. I did not threaten legal consequences. I did not say I told you so. I simply answered their questions honestly, calmly, the same way I had answered questions for years, explaining routines, history, involvement. And honesty has a weight to it when it has been consistent for years. It settles differently in a room. It does not wobble under scrutiny. And as those conversations unfolded, I began to understand something my wife never anticipated, that systems are not emotional, they are observational. They look for patterns. And the pattern they saw was not someone trying to cling to control. It was someone who had quietly been there all along. And as I stood there in that grocery store aisle, phone finally silent in my hand, I realized that while my wife thought she had walked away with the story neatly tied up, she had left behind a paper trail so clear it could not be ignored. And for the first time since she walked out smiling, I felt something shift inside me. Not triumph, not anger, but a deep, steady certainty that the truth was no longer something I had to explain. It was something that was already speaking for itself. My wife truly believed she could rewrite the entire story in one afternoon, that she could walk into offices, smile the way she always did, say the right words with enough confidence, and everyone would simply accept the version of reality that benefited her most. And what she never expected, what clearly never crossed her mind, was how many people already knew the real version because they had lived alongside it for years, watching it unfold quietly without drama. And when authorities requested clarification, not because I demanded it but because the records themselves raised concerns, her story began to change almost immediately. First she said I was just a stepfather, placing emphasis on the word just like it reduced everything I had done into something optional, something temporary. Then one that did not sit well with the paperwork in front of them, she shifted and said I was controlling, that I insisted on handling everything, that I pushed my way into roles she should have had. And when that explanation also failed to align with years of documented consent and voluntary absence on her part, She tried a third angle, claiming I was never really involved at all, that appearances were misleading, that she had done the real work behind the scenes. But the problem with lies, especially layered ones, is that they start contradicting each other the moment they are placed next to facts. And facts are stubborn things. They do not bend to emotion or intention, they fit. They're quietly waiting to be read, and her words did not match appointment logs showing my name and signature again and again. They did not match school attendance notes documenting my presence at conferences, meetings, and follow-ups. They did not match emergency room intake forms that listed me as the person who stayed overnight, the one who signed consent, the one who was reachable when decisions had to be made quickly. And eventually I was asked to come in and speak, not as an accused man defending himself, but as a parent providing clarity. And I remember choosing the same jacket I wore to every parent-teacher meeting, not because I thought it would make a statement, but because it felt honest, familiar, like armor made of routine. And when I sat down across from them, I answered calmly. I did not insult my wife. I did not accuse her of malicious intent. I did not raise my voice or dramatize my pain. I simply explained how life had actually happened over the years, who woke up early to get lunches ready, who rearranged work schedules to attend school events, who stayed late at hospitals pretending not to be worried, who was always reachable no matter the hour, who the child ran to instinctively when scared or hurt or unsure. And as I spoke, I could feel the room change in subtle ways. The tone softened, the posture of the people listening shifted, the questions slowed down and became more precise. And gradually they stopped being about me and started being about her. And when my wife was asked why she had not been listed as the primary contact in years if she was so involved, she said she trusted me, which only raised more questions. When she was asked why she never updated records after moving out if she believed she should have been the main guardian, she said she was busy. And when she was asked why the child had asked for me during a medical scare the year before, a moment that was clearly documented and remembered by staff, she had no answer at all. And that silence hung in the room heavier than any argument, because silence is loud when it has no defense. It echoes, it confirms what paperwork has already been saying. And in that moment I realized something important. This was no longer about convincing anyone of my worth or proving my love. It was about the collapse of a carefully constructed lie under the weight of years of quiet truth. And as the questions continued and her explanations grew thinner, it became clear to everyone present that the story she thought she could rewrite in a single afternoon had already been written a long time ago, not in words she controlled, but in actions she had underestimated. The call came late, well past 10, one of those calls that instantly tightens your chest because nothing good ever arrives at that hour unless it matters. And I remember sitting on the edge of the bed with the lamp off, the house dark and quiet except for the distant sound of a car passing outside, when my phone lit up and I answered with a voice that sounded steadier than I felt. And the voice on the other end was calm, professional, direct, the kind of voice that has delivered difficult news before and knows how to do it without drama. And they told me the child had expressed distress. They said it plainly, without accusation, without emotion. And then they said temporary custody would shift pending review. And for a moment my mind could not quite process the words because they sounded too simple for something that heavy. And then they said my daughter wanted to come home, and they paused before clarifying, not to my house, but to her home. And when the call ended I just sat there, phone still pressed to my ear, my hands shaking in a way that surprised me, not from fear, not from panic, but from relief so intense it actually hurt, like something locked inside my chest had finally been allowed to breathe. And I remember staring at the wall, the familiar cracks and shadows suddenly sharper, realizing that every quiet choice I had made, every form I had filled out carefully, every moment I had stayed steady instead of reactive, had led to this one call. And when my daughter walked back through that door later that night, escorted calmly, without urgency, without spectacle, she dropped her bag before it even hit the floor and wrapped her arms around me with a force that told me she had been holding herself together for far too long, like she had been bracing for impact and finally found solid ground. And she buried her face into my chest and cried in a way that was quiet but deep, the kind of crying that comes from relief more than sadness. And when she finally pulled back, she told me it felt different over there, not wrong exactly, just unfamiliar, like she was visiting someone else's life instead of living her own. She said people talked bad about me when they thought she was not listening. She said it confused her, made her feel like she had to choose sides when all she wanted was for things to feel normal again. She said she missed quiet dinners where nobody was on their phone, missed mornings that did not feel rushed or tense, missed feeling safe in the small, ordinary ways that only become obvious when they are gone. And I did not ask questions. I did not press for details. I did not let curiosity interrupt comfort. I just held her, letting her words settle without response. Because sometimes the most important thing you can do is listen without trying to fix anything. And that night I tucked her into bed the same way I had 1,000 times before, straightening the blanket, smoothing her hair, standing in the doorway for a moment longer than usual, and as I watched her fall asleep, breathing slow and even, I knew something fundamental had shifted, something that could not be undone, not because of a decision on paper, but because trust had been tested and chosen. And outside, at the end of the driveway, my wife stood watching during the exchange, not close enough to intervene, not far enough to pretend she did not care, just standing there with her arms crossed, her posture stiff, her face drained of the confidence it once carried. There was no yelling, no confrontation, no dramatic last words, just disbelief settling in as reality rewrote the ending she thought she controlled. The smile that once lived so easily on her face was gone, replaced by something hollow, something uncertain. And for the first time since she walked out that door with such certainty, she was no longer directing the scene. She was watching it unfold without her input. And as I closed the door behind my daughter and locked it, not out of fear but out of instinct, I understood that this was not about winning or losing. It was about a child choosing where she felt safe, and that choice had been made quietly, honestly, without pressure, and it changed everything. The formal review happened weeks later, not rushed, not emotional, but deliberate, methodical, the way serious decisions are made when a child's future is on the line. And by the time that day arrived, the pattern was no longer subtle. It was unmistakable, like a picture that had slowly come into focus until there was no denying what it showed. Because testimony had been collected from teachers who spoke about years of consistent involvement, about seeing the same man walk into conferences semester after semester, asking questions, taking notes, following up, never missing deadlines. Counselors submitted notes describing a steady presence, someone who understood the child's emotional rhythms, her anxieties, her strengths, her triggers. Doctors provided records showing who scheduled appointments, who stayed overnight during emergencies, who signed consent forms without hesitation, who knew medical histories by heart. And every thread, every piece of evidence, every professional observation pointed in the same direction. I was not the backup. I was not filling in. I was not a temporary stand-in until something better came along. I was the foundation, the constant, the person around whom the child's daily life had quietly been built. And when my wife sat across the room during that review, listening as these details were laid out not with accusation but with clarity, she tried to argue biology. She talked about bloodlines, about origins, about the importance of a child knowing where they come from. And those words might have carried weight in another context, but in that room, surrounded by years of documented reality, they fell flat. Because biology does not attend parent-teacher conferences, biology does not memorize medication schedules or allergy lists, biology does not sit in waiting rooms pretending not to be scared, biology does not answer the phone at 2 in the morning when a nurse needs a decision immediately, biology does not rearrange work schedules to make it to school plays or dentist appointments. And as those truths settled in, the questions directed at her became more focused, less forgiving. And when she was asked why she removed the child from a stable environment without proper planning, without ensuring continuity, without considering the emotional impact, she said she assumed things would work out. And that sentence, simple as it was, sealed everything. Because assumption versus preparation is the clearest line between impulse and responsibility, between wanting something to be true and doing the work to make it so. And the room leaned toward truth not because it was dramatic but because it was undeniable. Truth presented calmly does not need to shout. It does not need theatrics. It just waits while everything else collapses around it. And when the final recommendation came down, it was delivered without celebration or condemnation, just a statement of what the evidence supported: full custody to me, supervised visitation for her until trust could be rebuilt. And in that moment, I did not feel victory. I felt the weight of permanence, the understanding that this decision would shape lives far beyond that room. And my wife did not cry. She did not argue. She did not demand another chance to explain herself. She just stared ahead, eyes fixed on nothing in particular, like someone watching a door slowly close on a future they were certain belonged to them. And for the first time since I had known her, she looked small, not because she had been defeated, but because the story she told herself no longer matched the reality everyone else could see. And as I sat there listening to the final words echo in the room, I understood that exposure does not always come with scandal or shouting. Sometimes it comes quietly, through facts, through patterns, through years of unnoticed consistency finally being recognized. And that moment, the moment she was exposed, was not about punishment. It was about clarity, about seeing things as they truly were, stripped of narrative, stripped of charm, stripped of assumption, leaving only the truth standing alone. People have a strange idea of revenge. They imagine it as something loud and explosive, full of shouting, courtroom drama, public humiliation, or some final speech that leaves everyone stunned. But the truth is, real revenge rarely looks like that at all. Real revenge is quiet, almost boring to outsiders, because it is not about destroying someone else. It is about living so steadily, so honestly, that the person who tried to erase you is left having to explain their choices to strangers while you simply keep moving forward. And my wife lost far more than custody in the weeks and months that followed. She lost credibility in places she once relied on her charm to carry her through. She lost the easy trust of teachers and doctors who had once smiled politely and now spoke to her with careful distance. She lost the story she had been telling herself for years, the one where she was brave and misunderstood and finally choosing happiness, because that story could not survive contact with reality. And most of all, she lost the belief that confidence could replace consistency, that showing up occasionally with the right words could outweigh years of quiet presence. While I did not gain anything new in the way people usually measure success, I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel like I had won a battle. I simply kept what I had already built. And that difference mattered, because I did not celebrate the decision when it came. I did not go out or call friends or mark the moment in any dramatic way. I went home and cooked dinner, the same simple meals my daughter liked. I helped with homework at the same spot at the table. I reminded her about brushing her teeth and laying out clothes for the next day. I set alarms and packed lunches and checked calendars. And the next morning I showed up like always, because that had always been the point. I never wanted to win against my wife. I wanted to protect my daughter. And protection does not end when papers are signed or decisions are announced. It continues quietly in routines that feel ordinary but create stability. It continues in trust built through predictability, in presence that does not waver when things get inconvenient or emotionally complicated. And slowly, without anyone announcing it, I noticed something change in my daughter. She stopped asking where I would be later. She stopped checking in to make sure I was coming to events or picking her up. She stopped bracing herself for absence, because she knew, not because I told her, but because my actions had taught her over years that I was not going anywhere. And that certainty settled into her in a way no court order ever could. That is what security looks like. Not excitement, not grand promises, but the quiet knowledge that someone will still be there tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that too, long after the noise fades and the stories people tell themselves fall apart. If there is one thing I want people to understand, it is this: love is not the words you shout when you walk out the door. It is not the declarations made when tempers flare. It is not the gestures meant to impress or intimidate. Love is the quiet, deliberate labor you perform when no one is watching. The endless routine of showing up, noticing the small details, remembering the names of doctors and teachers, anticipating what a child might need before they even ask, staying calm when everything around you is chaotic, and building trust not with dramatic pronouncements but with actions so consistent that they create a life that no sudden absence or confident smile can erase. Because paper matters, and not just for the sake of bureaucracy, but because it is the record of what was done, who was present, who answered questions at 2 in the morning, who held a hand when the fever spiked, who rearranged work schedules to make it to the school recital. Presence matters, because children notice when someone is always there, when someone can be relied upon to face small emergencies with calm and large ones with resolve. Consistency matters, because patterns of care accumulate into something stronger than words. And when all of that is documented over years, when records, logs, notes, signatures, and patterns align, no smile at the doorway, no charm, no assumption, no clever story can undo the reality that was quietly built. And I know this now more than ever because I am 53 years old. I have made mistakes. I have faltered. I have wondered if my patience and quiet diligence were invisible and unappreciated. But in the end, I got the most important thing right. I stayed. I showed up. I built trust. And that commitment created a foundation no one could remove. And it was that foundation that allowed my daughter to come home safely, to know that she belonged, to know that stability is not a gift that can be withdrawn but a pattern created by someone who refuses to abandon it. And staying changed everything because it proved that loyalty and responsibility are more powerful than charm and fleeting confidence. And that sometimes the strongest revenge, the kind that cannot be measured in headlines or applause, is not taking something back. It is quietly proving that it was yours all along, that the life you built, the love you nurtured, the presence you maintained, one never temporary, one never conditional, and one never defined by someone else's perception. And in that quiet truth, in that relentless consistency, I found the lesson that lasts, the understanding that real power, real love, and real protection are invisible until they are tested, and when they are tested, they stand tall not because of noise or anger but because they were never anything other than steady, genuine, and unshakable from the beginning.